40 years, 2 generations, 1950 to 1990. In that span of time, Australia transformed so completely that someone from 1950 wouldn't recognise the country by 1990. Not just the technology or the buildings, but the entire fabric of daily life, how people worked, how they connected, what they believed, how they lived. These weren't slow, gradual shifts, they were seismic changes that redefined what it meant to be Australian. If you lived through those decades, you witnessed a revolution. If you didn't, you're about to discover just how different Australia was at the beginning and end of that 40-year journey. Let's trace the transformation. Number 1, from certainty to uncertainty about the future. And here's the most profound change from 1950 to 1990, the loss of certainty. In 1950, Australians believed the future would be better. Jobs were secure, houses were affordable, hard work was rewarded, and each generation would do better than the last. That optimism was built into everything, how people planned, how they saved, how they raised children. By 1990, that certainty was cracking. Job security was disappearing. Housing was becoming unaffordable for young people. The gap between rich and poor was widening, and the belief that things would keep getting better was fading. The economic and social structures that had created post-war prosperity were being dismantled through deregulation, privatization, and globalization. Australians in 1990 were wealthier in absolute terms than those in 1950, but they were also more anxious, more uncertain, and less confident that their children would have better lives. That loss of faith in inevitable progress might be the saddest change of all. Number 2. From closed country to connected globe. Australia in 1950 was isolated. International phone calls were prohibitively expensive and required booking. Letters took weeks. Travel overseas was rare and expensive. Information about the world came slowly through newspapers and wireless. By 1990, Australia was connected globally. International calls were affordable. Fax machines enabled instant document transmission. Satellite TV brought world news immediately, and overseas travel was accessible to middle-class families. The psychological shift from isolation to connection was profound. Australians in 1950 identified primarily with their local community and thought little about the wider world. Australians in 1990 were globally aware, influenced by international trends, and saw themselves as part of a wider world. That shift from insularity to globalization changed culture, fashion, politics, and identity. Number 3. From cash economy to credit culture. Australia in 1950 ran on cash. You saved for what you wanted, paid cash for everything, and debt was shameful except for home loans. By 1990, credit cards were universal. Buy now, pay later was normalized, and debt was how most Australians lived. This wasn't just about payment methods, it fundamentally changed the relationship with money and consumption. In 1950, if you couldn't afford something, you didn't buy it. In 1990, if you wanted something, you bought it and worried about paying later. That shift from delayed gratification to instant consumption changed spending patterns, savings rates, and financial security. The credit culture of 1990 enabled consumption levels impossible in 1950. But it also created debt levels and financial stress that the 1950s generation never experienced. Number 4. From community reliance to institutional dependence. In 1950, Australians relied on each other. Your street was your safety net. Neighbours helped when you were sick, lent money when you were short, watched your kids, shared tools and food. Mutual aid was how communities functioned. By 1990, institutions had replaced community. Childcare centres replaced neighbour babysitting, banks replaced informal lending, social services replaced community support, and paid professionals replaced helping hands. This professionalisation of support meant services became more reliable and equitable, but less personal and reciprocal. The 1950s Australian knew they could knock on any door and get help. The 1990 Australian knew they needed to call the right institution and navigate bureaucracy. Community bonds weakened as institutional solutions strengthened. Do you remember when you knew every neighbour and could ask them for anything versus living next to strangers? Number 5. From manufacturing economy to service economy. Australia in 1950 was a manufacturing nation. Factories, mines, farms, and construction employed the majority of working men. You made things with your hands. You built things. You produced tangible goods. By 1990, manufacturing was declining rapidly, outsourced to cheaper overseas labour. The service economy dominated retail, hospitality, finance, administration, healthcare. Office work replaced factory work for millions of Australians. That shift from making things to serving people changed the nature of work, the skills required, job security, and what counted as valuable labour. A working-class bloke in 1950 likely had a trade or factory job that would last his career. A working-class bloke in 1990 was more likely to be in casual retail or service work with no job security and no clear career path. The economic foundation of Australian life had fundamentally shifted. Number 6. From 3 TV channels to 24-hour everything. Television arrived in Australia in 1956 and initially offered limited programming on a handful of channels. By 1990, Australia had multiple networks, cable options, VCRs, video rental stores, and the concept of appointment viewing was dying. In 1950, entertainment meant wireless, cinema, or creating your own. By 1990, screens dominated TV, video games, computers. That shift from scarce, scheduled entertainment to abundant, on-demand options changed how Australians spent their time, what they talked about, and how they understood the world. The average Australian in 1950 might listen to the wireless for an hour in the evening. The average Australian in 1990 was consuming screens for 4 or 5 hours daily. That massive increase in passive consumption reshaped culture, attention spans, and social interaction. Number 7. From one-income families to two-income necessity. In 1950, most Australian families survived on one income. Dad worked, mum stayed home. That single wage could buy a house, raise kids, and provide a decent life. By 1990, two incomes had become necessary for most families. Women's workforce participation had skyrocketed, not primarily because of liberation, though that played a role, but because one income no longer covered the cost of living. Housing prices had risen faster than wages, childcare became an industry, and the economic model shifted. This wasn't just about women working, it fundamentally changed family structure, childhood, and daily routines. The 1950s nuclear family with stay-at-home mum and working dad became the exception. By 1990, replaced by dual-income households juggling work, childcare, and domestic responsibilities in entirely new ways. Number 8. From British subjects to multicultural Australians. In 1950, Australia was overwhelmingly Anglo-Celtic and proudly British. The national anthem was "God Save the Queen," the Union Jack dominated the flag, and immigration was restricted by the White Australia policy. By 1990, everything had changed. The White Australia policy was dismantled in the 70s, immigration transformed the population, and Australia became genuinely multicultural. Vietnamese, Lebanese, Greek, Italian, Chinese, and dozens of other communities reshaped Australian cities. The national anthem became Advance Australia Fair, and Australian identity shifted from British subject to independent nation. Walk down any city street in 1950 and everyone looked the same, sounded the same, ate the same food. Walk down that same street in 1990 and you'd hear a dozen languages, smell cuisines from around the world, and see a country that had fundamentally redefined itself. So there you have it, how life changed from 1950 to 1990 in Australia. from British to multicultural, from one income to two incomes, from limited entertainment to screen saturation, from manufacturing to services, from community to institutions, from cash to credit, from isolated to global, from certainty to anxiety. Some of these changes were progress. Multiculturalism enriched Australia. Global connection opened opportunities, and women's workforce participation expanded possibilities. But other changes came with costs lost, community bonds, increased debt, economic precarity, and eroded optimism. Those 40 years weren't just about new technology or changing fashions. They were about fundamental transformations in how Australians lived, worked, connected, and understood their place in the world. The Australia of 1990 was unrecognisable from the Australia of 1950, and the people who lived through those decades witnessed changes more profound than most of us will see in a lifetime. Which of these changes do you think had the biggest impact on Australia, and do you think we gained more than we lost? This was Retro Australia, where the past is still alive.